Good morning. Welcome to Dress for Success Toronto's Day 4 of our Mastering the Job Search Through a Pandemic virtual conference. You're probably used to seeing me by now. My name is Kate Green. I'm the Executive Director for Dress for Success Toronto. Dress for Success Toronto is a local affiliate of an international not-for-profit organization. Our mission is to empower women to achieve economic independence by providing a network of support, professional attire, and the development tools to help women thrive in work and in life. We support job seekers through our suiting program and our career learning program to provide clients with the attire, education, and resources they need to help accelerate the job search. Our suiting program is an empowering experience that both dresses our clients for success and inspires confidence. Our career workshops, like the one you're joining today, are hosted in partnership with our corporate supporters, providing a unique opportunity to gain knowledge and encouragement from highly experienced working professionals. Over the past year and a half, it has been well documented that, unlike in previous recessions, job losses have been concentrated among women. In Canada, women make up just under half of all paid workers, but account for 2/3 of all job losses. This week's virtual workshop has focused on how to effectively job search in these unprecedented times. These virtual workshops will provide you with the tools and resources you need to master your own job search. If this is your first session with us, I encourage you to access our recordings and take in all the knowledge that we've learned over the past 3 days. We started off our week navigating and adapting an effective job search during a pandemic. We learned how to craft an attention-grabbing resume and ace our virtual interviews. Yesterday, the Humphrey Group taught us the art of storytelling and how to use our own stories to represent ourselves through the job search process. Today, we have a sensational workshop hosted by Accenture discussing the importance of emotional intelligence. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors for making this conference possible. Thank you to our event sponsors, BMO Capital Markets, Mackenzie Investments, and Tourstar. Thank you to our session sponsors from LHH, Crowe Soberman, the Humphrey Group, Accenture, and Indeed, and to all of our add-on partners, Mars Canada, ICF, Toronto Chapter, and Toronto Crew. Without the support from all of our partners, this week's event wouldn't be possible. So a big thank you. I'm so thrilled to begin our session today and kick off our Day 4. I can't believe we're here at Day 4 already. Please allow me to introduce you to a face that you should all be familiar with by now, our All-Star Career Program and Volunteer Manager, Cassie Luters.
Thank you, Kate. As Kate stated, today's session will be covering the topic of emotional intelligence at home and work, presented by Tracy Chambers, Senior Manager of Talent and Organization and Human Potential at Accenture. With Tracy, we have Michelle Choi, Business Strategy Consultant at Accenture, who will be moderating the Q&A today. Make sure you check out Tracy's bio in the event platform to learn more about her work at Accenture. This session will be a way for you to learn more about emotional intelligence while at home and work, while also engaging in polling activities. For the poll features, we'll be using that throughout the presentation, which Tracy will talk about throughout. So now, without further ado, I would like to pass it over to Tracy to get started.
Thanks, Casey. I'm really excited to be back doing this workshop again. Did it last year, loved it. It was interactive, and I really liked the questions people were asking. Quick introduction to me. So I'm a senior manager in Accenture's talent organization and human performance practice. Really, really long title. Probably shouldn't be quite as long as it is, but that's where we're at. And what it means is I help organizations and individuals and teams move through transformation and adapt to change. And what we're facing right now is a lot of change and a huge amount of transformation. And it's going to be really interesting to see how we come out of this. But I really am passionate about this particular topic. So Michelle and I are both here with you today. She's going to pop in near the end and help us manage our Q&A to talk to you about emotional intelligence and why it's important in the workplace. And emotional intelligence means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But it's been especially important in getting everybody through the last 18 months as we've done this. It helps people in how they handle the current pandemic and the changes that they're facing. It also helps us with our coworkers and our families to navigate that component. And it's important to understand how we're responding in the moment and then how we can take it forward. So today we're going to focus a little bit on kind of the understanding what it is. We're going to talk about why it's important within the current context of the COVID we're working from home, we're looking for work remotely, and then we're talking about moving back to the workplace and what's that going to mean for people. And that's bringing up a lot of different emotions for folks too. So what's the importance of that? And we're going to do some practice. We're going to try and make this remote activity as practical and interactive as we can. So we've got a number of polls as we go along. So if you reflect back on what Cassie just said about where the polling function, please make sure you use that, because that's going to help inform how I tailor some of my comments, because we're going to ask you some questions. And depending on what's most important to you, some of my anecdotes and stories and some of the pieces that I bring forward might be a little bit different depending on where we're at. So that's how we're going to handle this next little piece. My clicker is really, really slow, gang. There we go. Okay. So voice your curiosity. If you've got a question, ask it in the chat. Someone will get it to us. Put it in the Q&A. We want to be able to you to leave here having some of your most pertinent questions answered. And so that's that interactive component to it. So we're going to do a really quick icebreaker, which also gives you the chance to try your polling feature. So find your poll wherever that is on your screen, either at the bottom or off to one side. And we want you to tell us, what does emotional intelligence mean for you? Okay, well, we try and work on that one. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stats. And I know you heard about some of them. Women have been inordinately affected by the pandemic. There's been a 16.5 average decline in women's incomes. Men saw about a 10% decrease in income. And that's over everybody. So that includes people who lost their jobs and went from 100 to 0. And it includes those who just started working part-time or had to take decreased wages. And so given that survey was across everyone, and including people who are still working, that's a massive decrease. And 16.5 is significant. I think this next statistic is particularly understated. Our initial research, kind of midway through the last year, was that women are adding an extra 1.5 hours a day to their childcare. I think that's understated. And I say that because I'm witnessing my friends who've got 8 and 9-year-olds who are trying to do their full-time jobs plus taking care of their children, or my other friends whose business went from booming in a record year to no work at all of a sudden at home. But then so were the children. And so I have a sneaky suspicion that 1.5 hours is an understated effect on women in terms of the childcare, because I know it's taking a toll on my friends. I've got older children. Doesn't affect mine as much, except that they're just stressed. Not additional childcare time, but they're just additionally stressed. So that also relies on me to have some of that emotional intelligence to help them work through it. 32% is the proportion of women with easy access to health care. Canada, those numbers are higher, which helps us, but that is down from 69% pre-pandemic. A lot of this is taken in the US as well, where if we think about it, if you lost your job, you also lose easy access to healthcare. So 60% of the women who lost their jobs due to the pandemic are women. And that's a horrible statistic. So how do we help women get back on track, and can we? And some of the alarming statistics here on the left-hand side of that slide are, what's it going to take to get to equality in the workplace? And the current projections are a really, really long way out. So we need to start moving the needle again in order to take a look at what we want to do. Now, interestingly enough, this isn't unusual. This is actually quite normal. Whenever a pandemic hits, we all step back and we go, or some major life event or catastrophe hits, we all step back and we go, what's most important to us? And so we always see some inflection points every time we get there. Emotional intelligence, there are some gender differences. So women are more likely to be seen as demonstrating emotional intelligence and empathy consistently in the workplace than men are. There's other competencies that women are known to be stronger in that are really important as we talk about new ways of working. The modern workplace is less hierarchical, less command and control, much more collaborative. One of the things that we're working with our clients on a lot is coaching skills, conflict management. There's a lot of those. Just the adaptability. Some people call it agility, and that kind of gets stuck because agile is a method of development for software, and it's a method of managing programs. So I like to think of it as flexible or nimble. And so those features, those factors are all much better if you've got some level of emotional intelligence. Anecdotally, they found that within UN peacekeeping teams, the teams that had women included in them, working in the communities, had stronger bonds with the community than those that didn't have women included in those peacekeeping teams. So there's a piece to this puzzle that we need to be able to leverage. And I'd like to encourage you as you move into the workplace to start to articulate that as part of, you can't tell it so much in your CV, but where you can do it is in your storytelling. So this can tie, so think about the workshop you attended on storytelling. And as we go through the next 45 minutes, think about how you might be able to incorporate some of this into that storytelling that you learned about yesterday. Because employers are looking for elements of EQ around teamwork, coaching, empathy. Those are important skills. So let's just think about that piece as you go through it. So emotional intelligence is important. And it's important because it means there's a few elements to it. First off, I recognize my feelings. And then I have the ability to perceive, and instead of reacting, I can choose how I respond. And you can evaluate the emotional components. Emotions are important. They're a data point. It's important to know that they don't necessarily control us, but they are one data point. And how people are responding to things is important around us. And emotional intelligence allows us to pick how we respond to others and how we react to others. And if someone's all of a sudden is normally really, really nice, and they're usually quite calm and composed, and they come in and they're short and they're snappy, or they're late to a video call, they're not turning on their camera and they usually are, their voice has changed. Those are all things that people who have an emotional intelligence or an emotional awareness pick up on, and it's a chance to check in and say, hey, don't seem yourself today. So think about those components of it as you go through this. So if we move to the next slide, so let's try the polling function again and answer that question for us. Why is EQ especially important during these times? You want to frame it in terms of job search, in terms of new ways of working, in terms of navigating family and work, that elusive work-life balance. Think about those pieces. And so take a moment and answer those. So there's some great responses in here. It is a good tool to assist in customer success. Absolutely. It's one of the primary things that helps people work through those forward-facing customer roles. As long as you don't take on all of the customer's emotions and can help them work through them. A couple of other good ones about being able to express when you're not well or when you're not up to dealing with something right now. So an intelligent way, instead of just avoiding something, it's a really good way of helping people just say, nope, good point. I think I need to reflect on that for a bit. Just being able to flex, deal with various situations. Not sure I understand. I think we need more information on the not in person. We're not in person. So EQ is actually even harder because you're relying on much more limited set of inputs to figure out and to pay attention to. So maybe that's what you were after. And it does help you become more resilient because you're not just kind of like a ping pong ball being bounced around. You get to control, oh, there's a good one. You get to control your feelings and not feel so overwhelmed. So those ones, there's some great ones in here. And then there's that high stress due to COVID. Absolutely. COVID has made absolutely everything harder. And I was talking to my daughters. So I've got 20 something daughters. So they're navigating the world and in this, missing a whole bunch of those major life events and milestones. But they were going, why am I so tired? And it's partially you're tired because COVID's made grocery shopping hard. We can get on grocery shopping on autopilot, but COVID has made even the simple things like grocery shopping harder. It's also made you second guess going to the doctor for little things because heaven forbid you really didn't want to go into the doctor's office where you could get sicker. So those are really good answers. We could go back to the main slides. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. That's absolutely true. So great answers. So I'm going to admit that I stole freely from some work by Daniel Goleman. And if you haven't read any of Daniel Goleman's work, I suggest that you do. He's written extensively on emotional intelligence, and he's got a whole bunch of different works on it that are really wonderful to follow along. And just if you allow yourself some chance to reflect. So I'll make sure that his name gets stuck in the general chat near the end so that you can see it. But if you haven't read his work and you're curious about this when you're done, I encourage you to look up that. But what he's done is he's given us a framework for thinking about it. And it's on two different axes. One is from yourself through to others. So how do you leverage emotional intelligence from just worrying about you? And it's kind of that oxygen mask concept from airplanes, right? Like if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others, all the way through to the others. So take care of yourself, then take care of others. And then from regulation and control up to, which is, we're managing how we respond or how others respond or how we respond to others, right through just the baseline of recognition and awareness. Because if you don't know that something's triggering you, you don't understand why you're feeling or responding the way you are, you can't manage it or regulate it, and you can't help other people, let alone yourself. So we're going to spend a little time on each one of those quadrants, kind of digging deeper into them. And you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, it's showing you which one of those boxes we're talking about, so you can kind of track along. This is on the self side, and up at the top about just awareness. And it's about baseline, recognizing your own emotions. What am I feeling? Without that self-awareness, you can't do the rest of this. Because you can't help others recognize what's going on if you can't recognize in your own self in the moment how you're feeling or what's triggering it. So understanding how we're feeling and starting to investigate why we feel that way. And Marianne Williamson's quote is really poignant here. Give yourself room to express your own thoughts and feelings. You don't have to put it out loud if you don't want to. You can write it down, just acknowledge it, allow it to surface. But I encourage you to step back and have that self-awareness. Because in that moment, it can help you stop and reflect about, okay, wait a minute, I need a second to process this. And this happens a lot with kids too. You'll respond to something they did. And you realize it's not them. It's what happened somewhere else. I was on an interview and it didn't go well. So now I'm grumpy over here with my children. I was rushed, I was late, I was commuting. We don't have a commute anymore, so now I'm late for anything I actually have to get in the car for. Those kinds of pieces can trigger emotional responses. So stepping back when you feel that and being aware of it. So just as I'm talking through this, I want you to think about how aware are you of your own feelings right now and your emotions, and how do you surface those? So that emotional self-awareness, but the comes from a beat. And we got a couple of really good questions coming in, and I will answer that one in 2 seconds, I promise. So sense the emotion. So first off, being aware of it, whether it's, and I wouldn't put good, bad, or otherwise. I would say sense the emotion and give it a name, but don't give it a name that implies a negative or a positive connotation. Happy is always a good one, but a bad feeling is not necessarily a bad data point. It's a data point. So acknowledge that that's how you're feeling and get more facts. Is there other stuff going on? I get irrationally upset in grocery stores now when people don't follow the arrows. Like, come on, people, they're right there. And I realized that like it was really irrational. It's like, wait a second. So I stepped back from that and realized that it wasn't about them going the wrong way or them not following the rules. I started thinking about what other factors or facts are influencing how I'm feeling about this in the moment. And what it came down to is my internal introvert who works from home, and hasn't had a lot of people. The grocery store that day when I was really irrationally upset about this, was really busy. And so it wasn't just that they were going the wrong way. I started looking around for what else is bugging me. And I wasn't getting the space I'd been used to over the last 18 months. Okay, so now I didn't have the space. All of a sudden there's random strangers around me and I'm not used to strangers anymore. And they're going the wrong way. And I'm kind of rule-abiding, like that one was basic for me. So just kind of acknowledging that feeling, took a deep breath and went, right, okay, so that's what's going on. Let's de-escalate this before I take out someone in the grocery aisle, and just kind of slowed down. And I started pulling over and letting just the people by so that I created the space for myself that I needed. Because I realized in that moment that it really wasn't going to be useful to take someone out in a grocery cart, make snarky comments to them as I went along or anything else. So, but the regulating it in the moment is about creating that awareness. And I'm going to get into how you regulate it in the moment a wee bit later. But I want us to try a really short breathing exercise. Now, not suggesting you do this in the grocery store, but I am suggesting that this might help kind of, for lack of a better word, ground you. And I am not if you're really into meditation, I am not that person. Okay. But I do find that breathing, especially before events that I think are going to be stressful or events that were stressful, can really help me. And this is a breathing exercise that just allows you to just kind of settle your central nervous system, and it works. So it's one where, and you'll get this deck, so it's one where you just sit comfortably, back straight, feet flat on the ground. So I'm just going to encourage you to do that while I talk you through this, and I'm going to just kind of quiet the voice a little bit. So sit comfortably, back straight, feet flat on the ground. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Go in through the nose and out through the mouth at your own pace. I'm not going to be that yoga instructor who makes you do it. So just breathing really slowly in through the nose, out through the mouth. Now, for one cycle, as you breathe in and out slowly, inhale and exhale, one cycle about 6 seconds. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3. It's just a really slow. And you want your ribs staying low and your belly moving. And just kind of as you breathe out, let those niggling thoughts, the anxieties, just breathe out as you do it. So we're going to do one more. And as you breathe out, let your thoughts flow out with that. So it's a breathe in, 1, 2, 3. And as you breathe out that anxiety and just let it go. So going to move on from that. But when you're feeling really anxious in the moment, if you're not in the grocery store, not suggesting you sit there with your eyes closed in the middle of the grocery store. That's about emotional awareness too. But just think about how that one might work and allow yourself. I've done it in the car after a commute when I've had a particularly hard day before I've transitioned into the house to deal with my kids, or from a particularly tough conversation to one where I'm trying to transition back to home. That's usually frequent. Or because I flip between dealing with different teams, and I've got some teams that are high anxiety and they're just running and I need to help calm them down. If I bring any angst into it, then it makes it a lot harder. And so someone asked a question about regulation, and that comes under self-management. And literally, it is the ability to manage our own actions, our thoughts, our feelings, so that we get the results we want and our amygdala doesn't take it over, because it has a tendency to take it over. And so it's important to not allow that fight or flight component to just react. And it's an old adage, but there was an idea that and you may have done this, but I was taught years ago that if you're really angry or really reacting to something, you should craft your letter, your email, and then just trash it. And then to get all of your angst out, and then you'd craft the nice, wise, slow, proper email. So interesting, it came up in my HBR feed the other day. They're calling it something slightly different now, but what they're saying is write the email in reverse. And they're saying acknowledge because a lot of stuff's coming in by email now. Acknowledge it, say, hey, good point, need a little bit of time to respond. And give yourself the time to write the email in reverse. So think about what that person's actually trying to accomplish. What do they want from you? And slow it down to write it. So they've changed what they're calling it a little bit. Now they're calling it writing in reverse. So writing it from the point of view of the person who will receive it, but it's the same kind of concept. And another way to help you kind of manage yourself in the moment is to do a daily check-in. How am I doing physically? And there's some questions here to ask yourself. How am I doing? Can I think? When we get stressed, there's a cognitive dissonance that happens, right? It's kind of like brain fog. And you can't concentrate. You read the same page over and over again. I know that when I'm not at work, all of my heavy duty reading isn't happening anymore. I am reading light and fluffy. My 20-something-year-old daughters who love to read, are reading young adult books that they've read years ago. The one in grad school is reading stuff that she read when she was 15. She literally is so tired between navigating the COVID world and school that although we all are a family of readers, she's acknowledged she just simply can't cope with anything new. She wants the familiar. So checking in with how you're emotionally doing in your heart, how you're feeling in your head, like can you actually think, can you take in more information, or do you need to give yourself a break? And behavioral, are you sleeping too much? Are you not sleeping? Are you putting off stuff that you normally would get done? Give yourself kind of like a little mental checklist every day to see how you're doing, and then give yourself permission to take care of one of those pieces. And that's how, in this case, my daughters are handling that component. So the one is just reading stuff she's been reading for almost 10 years. And she could tell you the story. She doesn't even really need the book in front of her. The other one cannot read a new book that she doesn't know the ending to. Ditto with video games, because she's a gamer. And she's looking up online what's happening to the key characters in her games that she's playing, because she finds she can't handle the additional stress of not knowing the outcome. So what she's done, because she still wants to play the video games, is she's managed to do her self-assessment and then go, all right, here's how I need to solve it for myself. So I encourage you, in terms of self-regulating, to take a look at that component and say, all right, here's what I need to do for me. Because that's part of that self-regulating and understanding how you're feeling and allowing you to make choices for yourself. And that's an important piece. So that's my suggestion for regulating in the moment. I am going to admit that I'm not always as good at it as I would like to be. I catch myself, I go, what the heck am I doing? I also know, now I've got some interesting daughters, I admit that. In the past, my kids have been known, and this is when they were in their late teens, when they were still living at home, they have been known to sit me down, go, Mom, we need to talk. We think your response to what just happened was out of keeping with the degree of what we just did. So whatever it was they did, they didn't do their homework. It was something, it was never major, but I had reacted in the moment because of something, usually something in my case that had happened at work. They go, Mom, what else is going on? We don't think this is really what the cause is. And so they were so having that friend, that backup team that helps you become aware of when you're responding in the moment, and that's that trusted relationship. I used to hate it when they did it, right? It's like, no, I'm fine. Well, no, I'm not. Okay, yeah, you're right, you guys. Okay, this is what's going on. Now, sometimes I couldn't tell them what was going on, but I could acknowledge that they were right. Didn't like it much, but I could. So, couple different things. Make sure you're checking in on those 4 quadrants for yourself. So physically, your mind, your heart, and your soul. So make sure you're checking in with yourself on a regular basis. If you know something's going to be anxiety driven or change how you're feeling or you're scared of it, try some of those breathing exercises, and there's lots online. And then by the same token, have a trusted friend or a trusted team behind you that can help you. And if it's something you struggle with, ask someone you trust to give you some clues. Hey, I'm trying to work on this. Can you help me with this one? So there's a good question from the audience, and it's about what does it actually mean? When you take that EQ test online, it gives you the different scores. You sky high in self-awareness, but not high in social. High EQ is just like regular intelligence, is across the board. So if you're high in self-awareness, that's awesome. But take that same skill set and bring it, especially if you're in the workplace or if you're hoping to help with family, bringing that awareness to others. So that high EQ means a balance in both. So if you're really, really high on self and low in others or social, or vice versa, if you're high in social but not very high in self-awareness, it may mean you need to do a better job taking care of yourself and checking in with yourself and making sure that you're doing okay and not worrying so much about others. Now, note to all of us, parents, especially mothers, are particularly other-oriented. Now, there's good things and bad things about that. The good thing about that one is that it allows us to bring that skill to teams and take care of our team from an emotional perspective and create that psychological safety that's so important for teams to really perform well. The downside of that is sometimes you neglect to take care of yourself. And I'll take us back to the oxygen mask example. If you're not breathing in your own oxygen and taking care of yourself, then you can't take care of others. There's also a really good meme on Facebook right now, and they're comparing human energy to the battery on your phone. And you would never let your phone run out of energy, but frequently, especially with women, we do. So make sure you're recharging yourself. So I'm hoping that answers the question from the audience about what does it mean to have high emotional intelligence? Truly high emotional intelligence is both. If you've got a high score or a low score, encourage you to take a look at the implications for yourself of one versus the other, and then start to work on the other piece of it. So daily 1-minute exercise or activity for you to do. And I'm not going to get us to do it here because we're going to run out of time. But think about the 4 things that really help recharge people. So physically energized. So that's pretty basic. We've been hearing this a lot. It's exercise. And exercise does not have to mean going to the gym. Exercise could be getting outside, going for a walk. It can be yoga, it could be swimming, but walking counts, gang. So does the gym, not knocking it. Like the gym, and I really miss the gym. But it's also walking. So get out, move, get some sleep, and eat real food. Pretty basic. We've been hearing about that. But that sense of belonging is also important. And it's been tough because for some of us, our sense of belonging comes from community. And we've been kind of in isolation a little bit, and our community has shrunk significantly. So it's a need to feel included. It's a need to have contact and communication with those that family, friends, workplace. I miss my teams at work. I only ever talk to them over Teams or Zoom or whatever it is. I miss that contact. And I'm an introvert. So how is it doing for the extroverts of the world? So thinking of that sense of belonging, and what do you do for yourself each day to create that sense of belonging? Is it quiet time with your kids at the end of the day? Is it a remote walk and chat with a good girlfriend? Making sure that you're taking care of that for yourself is important. But also, I encourage it in my teams, because you can pick up, if you're working with teams and you're bringing that EQ into your teams and your workplace, it's also something you can ensure that happening in your teams. And that's why it's an important piece for the job search and to be able to articulate it. Because strong teams are ones that feel safe and have that psychological safety to test stuff, to try stuff, to fail. But it's also what creates connection. And so being able to articulate as part of your story the fact that you're good at being aware of others and making sure they feel included. Anyone who's done any diversity, equity, inclusion work knows that diversity without inclusion, you might as well not have diversity. Because if you go for a diverse workforce and they don't feel included, then they're not participating and you're not getting the value from that diverse workplace. So being able to create that sense of inclusion and belonging is important, but do it for yourself first too. That sense of purpose. Doing it for the sake of doing it does not help energize people. So one of the ways you can take care of yourself is making sure you're really aware of what does drive you. What is that sense of purpose? And it might be some of the stuff you do at work, but it also may be some of the things you do in your home. Or it may be some of the things you do in your community. So, and I know a whole bunch of women who have really good jobs, but it's not their sense of purpose. So they spend a huge chunk of their lives doing other stuff within their community to get that sense of purpose. And most of them are now starting to shift to stuff that drives that sense of purpose. So just making sure you connect with what that looks like for you. And I know most of you are looking for work and you're in that job search piece. Just get really clear about whether those roles that you're looking for, make sure they fit your values. It doesn't have to drive your sense of purpose all the time, but there needs to be a shared common value component, because if it doesn't, it's going to really destroy that sense of purpose. So not all jobs have to give you your sense of purpose, as long as you're aware of where else you can find it. And then take care of your brain. Think about your mental health, making choices rather than being reactive to things, making time for you to recharge, but also learning to say no sometimes. Be aware of your own strengths and where you're sometimes weak, and ask for help. So just, check in on a regular basis and ask yourself about where that's at. So now we're going to move to the social awareness piece. And social awareness is the other part, right? So far we've been talking about the self and what I need to do to take care of me. Once I'm taking care of me, so I need to be aware of my own emotions, and then I need to learn how to take care of my own emotional intelligence and my own mental, physical, spiritual health. Social awareness is about what others around us are thinking, feeling, and responding to. And it's especially important right now because we don't know what other people are responding to and what else might be triggering them. But taking the lens that there might be something else and it's not all about you or the moment, and remembering that when you're interacting with others is important, but creating that space for them to explore what else is going on. So empowering language is really handy when you're talking to other people. I'm choosing to do this, not I have to do this. I want to, I will. It's like the whole thing about I try or I will. If you're going to, trying frequently doesn't work, I am going to do this is much more empowering language. Collaborative language means that you're not taking credit for everything. We know people who've done that. It's about our team. Hey, our team did this, not I did this. Now, if you did it, but here's the other piece of this problem. This language is written by a guy, Daniel Goleman, brilliant man, great. But what he also neglected to add to this is women frequently give credit to others and will talk about team, whereas men will frequently say, I did this, even when it is done as part of a team. So make sure that while you're talking collaboratively, you're also representing your own contributions to that. That's a total aside from this piece of the puzzle. Collaborative language is important because it's inclusive and reflects what other people have done. Also taking personal accountability for your own language and your own thoughts and your own feelings. I feel, I think, I believe. And then specific language, use a scale. So instead of 1 to 4, or instead of saying, well, this happens, on a scale of 1 to 4, where are we at with this? Get people to give you kind of a scale for it. So I'd like you to, as we're saying this, what kind of language do you use when you're talking to a team and when you're talking to other people? So a couple of scenarios here. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on this. During your job search, you find out on LinkedIn that you have a connection who works for the company that you're interested in applying for. You send a couple of LinkedIn messages, but you don't hear a reply for several weeks. How would you respond in this situation? And I think this is a poll question. So let's just take a moment and have you think about, give us a couple of them, and we'll show a couple of the polls on the screen really quickly. There we go. Try to stay positive. Any others coming in? Think about it in terms of COVID. What else might be happening? Yep, stay calm, relaxed, follow up a few times, be empathetic. Those are good. Those are good ones. I actually reached out to a client the other day that asked me to reach out to him at this time. Yep, follow up by telephone. Perhaps they're not active on LinkedIn. Those are great ideas. Mope. Yeah, probably a little bit of that too. Or reach out to other people. Those are great answers. So as we go back to the presentation, I'm going to tell you so I reached out to a client the other day. He had asked me to reach out to him at the end of May. And I did. And then I didn't hear back from him. And it's a relationship with a client where I go, hey, I hope you're well, your family's okay. Like I know where his family's at. It's one of those clients. And he didn't respond for several days. And I leapt, because it's COVID, oh my goodness, I hope he's safe. He and his family are safe. And it's that difference in leap. And when he responded late last night and told me what was going on, it was like, oh good, you're all okay. It's amazing right now, the difference. So being aware that there's other things that could be happening in their lives. So you finally hear back a reply. She mentioned she's been busy taking care of a sick parent. How would you empathize with her situation? So let's take a moment and go to the poll and let's see what you say on that one. Sorry to hear your mom's sick. Yep. Hope she's feeling better soon. How is she? Offer a listening ear. Perfect. Remind her to take care of herself as well. Those are all great examples. Perfect. No, you've got it. Thank you. So comfort, support, just respond and acknowledge that you've heard what's going on. And then say, hey, let's touch base later when you've got less on your hands. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so can we go back to the presentation? So really good responses to that one. Those are skills that are needed in the workplace, because you can be in a team too and have team members who are responding and you don't know what else is going on for them. And I'm good at the extreme right now has been, I've got a team that I'm working with that's in Canada and the UK. So the UK has been locked down for a really long time, but we also have a bunch of people working with us in India. And so taking time over the last month and a half to check in with their lead and see how they're doing and find out whether they can handle the workload, whether we need to change stuff, and just asking them how they're doing has been huge in keeping them engaged. They're all fine, but the people around them haven't been. And that's created additional stress for them. But one of the pieces of feedback I got was just a thank you for checking in with us. We appreciate it. So those are important aspects to this. So those are things that you can articulate as part of your story. So when you're doing your storytelling, managing to weave into it, hey, from a team perspective, here's how I have, and add that to your story. So relationship management, if you look at the quadrant that we're working on, we've moved from self to others, and now we're moving into how do we help to regulate others. And it's about helping other people control theirs so that things don't escalate. And you want to understand other people's emotions, but don't fully take it on. It's not about owning their emotions. It's about acknowledging them. And a lot of the time, conflict in a team is really about a lack of understanding. It's also all about tone. Tone has an amazing impact on people. There is no tone in email. And so people frequently will think someone said something snarky to them, and you'll read an email and somebody else will read the email and go, no, that wasn't it. So can't get face-to-face, but you can get as much as this is face-to-face on Teams, on Zoom, whatever it is you're using. And so you can see people's faces and you can hear the tone of voice, because that's huge. But also check in and make sure you've got it right. And so think about how you personally frequently will deal with conflict, because there's a lot of different ways of dealing with conflict. And some people have the total avoidance. I'm going to ignore it and it will go away. The thing is, it frequently doesn't. And so I was interviewing someone the other day, and the tone of voice changed. And I said, did I ask a strange question in that? And she said, no, but how I'm responding is confusing me. I said, oh, she says, it made me anxious. I said, okay, so what part of it did? And we went into that in the actual interview. Now that's also partially me picking up, because she had been bubbly and engaged and a little bit over the top. And then I had asked her a question and it caused her to reflect. And when she slowed down to reflect, we unpacked it a little bit. What happened was she had been moving along, and then I caused her to reflect on something else she'd said, and then she started to second guess herself. So we unpacked. She goes, oh, I think I'm second guessing my response on that one. So we went back to that, but that was me checking in with her. So when you're thinking about relationship management, whether it's in a team, whether it's in an interview, whether it's with your family, it doesn't matter. Remember perspectives. People are seeing and interpreting what you're saying based on their understanding of what's going on. And their understanding might be totally different. And it can come down as much to language as to anything else. So check, if you're noticing that, check and make sure you got the same definition of this. And also try and understand what their perspective on this might be. Body language. This is an oldie, but it's true. People who won't make eye contact with you, arms across. Now, maybe they're just cold. But as we move into summer in Ontario and across the rest of Canada, we're not usually really cold. Not impossible, because I think Ontario had snow last week. I'm in BC at the moment because during COVID, I decided I needed to be close to my family because that was what was important to me. I went through my whole needs assessment about what was important to me. And so I'm hanging out with my family at the moment. But check in with body language. Check in with tone of voice. Has tone of voice gone up, gone down, gone quiet? Are they even talking to you? Those are all important pieces. They also are good when you're in an interview setting. And once we get to the Q&A session, I'll talk a little bit more about that one. And stereotypes. Stereotypes sometimes help us, but more often than not, stereotypes and unconscious biases get in our way. So seek to understand people's perspective and don't leap to assumptions. Because when we do that, it can sometimes get in our way and we make assumptions about what a person can understand, what they can't understand, what they might be good at. And so not using stereotypes. So we're going to give you a quick scenario. So you've been applying to a bunch of jobs over the last couple of months. You get an invitation for a video interview. And this is a weird one, given that we're coming out of the pandemic, but it's still likely to happen. During your interview, the interviewer asks you why you have a career gap in your resume. Let's use the poll. How would you respond in this situation? And we put this in here because even though there's some really viable, and if we could go to poll results as I talk through this. Yeah, exactly. Be honest. Explain what I was doing. Try to show that you were. Some people ended up with a gap over the last year, absolutely outside of their control. Some took off to take care of parents, children. There was all kinds of different things. So absolutely be honest. But you're also going to need to control your own reaction to that. Because when we were talking this through with Casey, it was like, yeah, no, that's a frequent one. And don't make sure that you're prepared for that question and you can help monitor your own emotional response to this. Absolutely. So it's all about being honest about the time. You do not have to overshare. You can stick to what you are comfortable doing. This is an interview. But absolutely, I took time off to take care of my children during COVID, or the company I was working for drastically reduced the workforce when we hit the pandemic, and I found myself out of work. I stayed home to take care of my children. All of those answers are perfect. You need to take some time off for family matters, and then just talk about how you can move it and what you learned. Absolutely great answers. Can we go back to the presentation? You guys are getting really good at answering the poll questions now that we've figured it out. So great answers in that one. So it's about, but be prepared for questions that might, when you're in the interview piece, be prepared for questions that might create that funny feeling in your stomach or however it is you respond to it. I'm going to skip through this question. I'm not going to do this poll, but I want you to think about, as this is an example of one of those ones that might cause you to feel anxious. And I want you to think about how you might handle that one. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. What I am going to talk about is kind of how you can work on some self-management or encourage your teams to work on some self-management before we go to the kind of the Q&A piece of this puzzle. I would really love it if my day didn't start till 8. I'm going to be honest. So the reality is seldom do our days start at 8, but let's think about it as though they do, or whenever your day starts, you can do this. But do a little bit of that mindfulness and reflection. Remember up at the top, we had that check in with yourself and see where you're at. Did it hurt when I got out of bed? Did I get enough sleep? What's in front of me today? Take a look at all of those pieces. You don't have to write it down. Some people like to write it down. But there's some really good mindfulness exercises that you can do to just kind of help settle yourself, especially if you didn't get the kind of sleep you needed the night before. Diarize it if it helps you. Don't if you don't want to. But there's a couple of really good tools you can use for that. So the mindfulness app that we've got there, Headspace. There's also just the activity we gave you at the beginning of the deck. Walk and talk. I've been encouraging people to do this more and more often. We're stuck in front of screens all the time. There is absolutely no harm in sticking on a headset and going for a remote walk with people. Get out and move. Get out and listen to a podcast that's a learning podcast. Do something that helps you move. Make sure you're feeding yourself. Job searches are like jobs, right? Like if you're going to do it right, you need to put the time in, you need to do the planning, you need to set up the interviews, you need to reach out to people. There's work involved in that. So make sure you're feeding your brain and being planful. So there's a bunch of tools as you work through this day that can help you settle down and get yourself through the day. I also really like it if my day ended at 5. However, also giving yourself at the end of the day to reflect on what you did and what you didn't do so that you can set yourself up well for the next day. I always make sure, because I'm working from home, my calendar is different, my time zones are different. I always make sure that before I log off at the end of the day, I check what time my first meeting or team is. So in your case, what time is my interview? Make sure you've set yourself a time that you want to be up and in your job search mode by. So making sure that at the end of the day, before you go to bed, you know when your day starts so you can plan back from there to give yourself the time you need to set yourself up. Because otherwise you're running behind before you even get up. And that's a tough place to be in. And just anecdotally, so I've got a client, I'm in Vancouver at the moment. I've got clients in the UK. By the time I get up and go online, usually at about 5:30 or 6, I'm already behind because it's their afternoon and they've been working all day. So I come back to a Teams chat box that's filled with stuff and things I need to respond to. And when I first started working with this client, I would get up and I would feel behind from 6 a.m. on. And it was this horrible feeling. And I went, wait a minute, it's only 6 a.m. here. Hang on, pause. And I had to do that reset for myself to say, wait a second. No, it's okay. They were just working in their day, but I had to acknowledge what was creating the feeling. That goes back to that self-awareness. I needed to figure out what the setting was. So what am I feeling? What are the other facts? Oh, wait a second. Yeah, I feel behind because they've been working all day. They've already put in 6 hours of their day. This isn't on me to try and catch up to them. I am not late. But I needed to pull in all of the other facts, have a chat with them about expectations. Because it turns out they were feeling the same thing. They'd get up and they'd have this barrage of stuff that we'd done overnight. But I wasn't seeing that perspective. But that's a good example of where we talked it through. I said, hey, here's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling behind before I even get up. Do you need, so we worked out a way to identify stuff that they needed me to prioritize when I got up. And I gave them stuff that they needed to prioritize versus other things that could happen later in their day. I need this when I come online at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Okay. They do it in the first half of their day versus stuff. I said, I don't need it till the end of my day on Friday. Then they can pick when they get it done. So just clarifying when things needed to be done, because I honestly thought I was the only one feeling behind. Turns out, because we did it all overnight too, they were as well. So learning to check in. And so we actually moved through that whole quadrant, if you think about it, with that one example. We went from me acknowledging what I'm feeling and looking for some other facts to figuring out what I needed to do to regulate it. And then I'm going, wait a minute, how are you guys feeling? So that's that other awareness. And then together we worked through a plan about how we were going to manage that for our teams, because it was more than just us. There was a team in the UK and I have a team in Canada. And so how are we going to weave that all through? And so we moved through all 4 of those quadrants as we were doing that. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle to think about. And if you articulate that in an interview about how you think your own personal emotional intelligence can help with teams, because a lot of teams are remote these days and are going to stay remote, you can articulate that. So I think we're going to move into the Q&A session here. And I think Michelle's going to pop up on the screen with me to help manage this. And as we do that, I'm going to kind of take one of the first questions about how do I show EQ in an interview? And some of that is in how you respond to stressful questions interviewers ask. Some interviewers, nicer than others, some of them will deliberately ask you questions that are a bit anxiety ridden. So it's in how you manage yourself when they ask you those tough questions, because they know asking you why you have a gap in your work history, they know that that's stressful. So it's in how you respond to that you can demonstrate it. You can also use stories. So if they ask you a question around in the interview to talk about how would you handle, because a lot of them, they give you situations to respond to. You can leverage EQ in that story and how you respond to that question. Michelle, are you going to help answer some of these questions, or am I on my own?
No, I can definitely jump in as well. So, I mean, we've had a lot of great questions come in throughout the session. I think one of the main kind of upvoted question that we have is, what are some tips and tricks for practicing appropriate tone of voice or body language?
Okay, so I'm going to take a first stab at it, and then I'd like you to chime in on this one. One of them for practicing is find a trusted friend, family member. Teenagers are brutally honest. I can attest to that one. And get them to flag for you just some of the ones that you're worried about. So if you want to appear more confident, this works especially with friends and sometimes spouses, if there's one around, or partners, is get them to tell you when you're not sounding confident, as an example, but get them to flag for you when you're not, or when, hey, you really knocked that out of the park. I'm proud of you on that one. You got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for me, just so that I'm, more aware about my tone of voice, I mean, especially maybe, during, if I have a presentation coming up, or like a big, client meeting coming up, I also try recording, myself, either in a video or recording my voice, just to see how I sound. And just making sure that, I take the appropriate pauses and just being aware about, my tone during the presentation as well. So that's just a way for me, recording, or even just practicing in front of the mirror a couple of times really helps me out. All right.
I'm going to add one more to that one. I'm going to add, watch the words that you use. A lot of the time, and this is, women are guilty of this one, is we use a lot of kind of wiggle words to qualify our responses. The more you do that, it kind of destroys that feeling of confidence. So I will, I did, well, we might, no. Okay, so really watch that piece of this puzzle. All right, so that's that one. Which one next? Which one do you want to deal with next?
Yeah, so we have also a lot of questions around, how can I use emotional intelligence during the job search? Should we add emotional intelligence into your resume?
It's hard to add it into a resume, is the honest answer, but it is easy to add it into your interviews because you can leverage, you don't have to even say emotional intelligence. You can demonstrate where you were. So remember when at the beginning I said, weave this into your storytelling? That's where you want to bring in the emotional intelligence. You can't, saying I'm emotionally intelligent doesn't have the same weight as if you demonstrate how you were emotionally intelligent in the moment. And I've given you a bunch of examples of where that can be played out in the workplace. I gave you team examples where you're checking in with your team and paying attention to body language. It's in how you dealt with people who were excluded from teams. So if you think about the jobs, the interviews these days, there's a big focus on team, on collaboration, on communication. And that emotional intelligence plays a huge role in that. It's right down to how you ask questions of other people and taking time to listen. So when you're telling the stories in answer to an interview question, make sure you weave in, here's when we were dealing with this tough situation, because there's usually a question about, how did you deal with a tough setting? Weave in the human element to this. Weave in how you listened to other people. You noticed that so-and-so was left out, or that there was a conflict that really just came to a disagreement about concepts or content. That one's important to do. So that's one way to do that one.
Yeah, if I can just add, I think during the job search, as you mentioned, like when you're reaching out, especially to people that you might not know, I think trying to make like a connection, right? And during the emails that you sent out or the LinkedIn request you sent out, having a little bit, adding that human element, I think is really important. And even if you are reaching out to someone that you don't know, trying to look at their profile in advance and see where you could have a point of connection, I think is also another way to show that you've done your homework and your research, and a way to just show emotional intelligence to people that have never actually talked to you or met you before. So we have a couple of other questions. We talked about emotional intelligence in the job search process. We talked a little bit about how to show emotional intelligence during an interview. We have a lot of questions as well on how you can show emotional intelligence in the workplace, and how do you handle perhaps working in a toxic work environment where you're being judged a lot, or a lot of people, the team members talk over each other. How would you handle that situation?
Okay, so I gave you some of those. And so here's an example of the awareness piece. My laptop was dying, which causes me stress because then I thought I was going to lose connectivity. So be aware of the fact that was driving me crazy for the last several minutes. And so needed to kind of manage that and just go, okay, to hell with it. I'm going to disappear, gang, and I'm going to go find the charger and plug it in, because somewhere when I was moving around to get the right light, I lost that. So the toxic environment piece is a tough one. It always is, because it also depends so much on where you're at in the team structure. But calling it out and saying, hey, I think there's some really unhealthy ways we're communicating. You can also try setting some ground rules in meetings. So, and you don't even have to call them ground rules. You can suggest, if you are the supervisor, it is different than if you're not, right? So I'm usually a team lead. So my response to it is to say, is to call everybody together and say, here's what I'm observing. I'm observing people are cutting each other off, like, because I can do that. That's usually my role. If you're not, it's actually harder and it's a little bit more subtle, especially if your team lead is doing it. But you can quietly say, and I would do this quietly to the team lead or whoever is could actually set some of the ground rules for that team. You can take them aside quietly and go, hey, I've really observed this happening, and I don't think we're hearing from these people. Or some of these people seem to be feeling left out. Or you can also, because I'm observing that in others, you can also even more powerfully take it from a personal experience. Hey, in these meetings, here's what I'm feeling. Is there a way we could try doing X? Because if they had, the catch is sometimes we have to provide solutions to team leads, because if they haven't caught on to the fact that this isn't a productive way to have a meeting, then they need help to figure out how to make it productive. So coming at it from a personal perspective that reflects your own self-awareness about what you need and what you're feeling, really hard for them to argue with you about what you're feeling. You could say, no, they could, if you're talking about somebody else, they can really easily say, no, they're fine. But if you're talking to them about how you're feeling, it's hard for them to argue with you on your own personal feelings. So coming at it from that perspective sometimes helps. If it's the team lead, sometimes you may have to go over their head if it's really bad. You could try talking to a mentor or someone else in the organization. Say, culturally, especially if you're new to the organization, hey, here's what I'm observing. Don't use any names. I need some help figuring out how to navigate it. How might I? And get some help from someone else in the organization. Because especially if you're new to the group, it's sometimes tough to figure out culturally how to navigate it and who to talk to get an intervention. I know some groups that struggled for ages with this and then discovered that there was a coaching group in the organization that was tasked with coming in and helping teams work through that and become more productive and high performing. But you had to invite them in. And so, but they didn't know it was there. And it was a relatively new team lead to this group. And they were struggling with getting these people who'd worked together this really strange way for a very long time. And was really struggling to get, and went to someone else they know in the organization and said, I'm really struggling with this team. Here's how they communicate. And they said, oh, why don't you reach out to so-and-so? So also try reaching out to others in the organization. Okay, what else are we missing here? What one do you want to talk to next?
Yeah, I think there's some questions around, how do you deal with if you have, depression or anxiety, and a lot of the, emotions kind of surface up a lot. How do you, deal with this, the situation in an interview setting or even in the workplace when you are, dealing with a lot of emotional distress or even depression. Yeah.
That one is harder. And I know because I have a daughter who deals with anxiety that she's got a lot of coping tools that she uses, ways to ground herself. And she's got some that are more subtle than others. And so the piece about the puzzle, especially interviews, because they'll frequently trigger some of this stuff, is to know that it's stressful and to practice a lot to help decrease as much as possible the stressfulness of it, so that the answers are there, that you practice it a bunch, and get her to select some of those coping mechanism and grounding activities that she can do. And this is where actually video interviews help those who are anxious. Because you can do some of those tapping mechanisms and grounding mechanisms, and the interviewer doesn't need to see them. Whereas when you're face to face, it's harder to hide some of your coping mechanisms. She literally did a TV interview, which scares the living daylights out of her. And she had the family dog sitting in her lap because that's how she calms down. Now, this is a 9-year-old lab, so it's 72 pounds a dog. It's not a dog that's going to jump up and start yapping all the time. But that was how she coped with that. We planned it. We rehearsed the questions and all those pieces. It's harder face to face. And so sometimes that honesty really comes in handy. Don't overplay it because you don't want them to think it's going to get in the way of what you can do, because the reality is you can still be really good at your job and be dealing with anxiety and depression. It's just you also need to learn to take care of yourself. So sometimes honesty is the best answer. Feeling a bit anxious in this setting, and it's getting in the way of me being as coherent as I'd really like to be, or whatever that looks like for you. Or slowing down, and this actually goes back to some of the interviewers that are rushing you through this. Slow it down and articulate the question. So buy yourself some time to breathe, and it also allows you to slow down the interviewer. So if they're starting to rush through, hey, can I restate the question just to make sure I answer it right? Buys you a few minutes to let your anxiety brain, as my daughter would call it, slow down enough to formulate a clear answer. But also, if your interviewer is rushing through, it slows down the interviewer. So there's a control piece that also helps in there too, right? So if they're constantly interrupting you, you can also say, heard a bunch of questions in there. I've moved on, Michelle. I'm kind of weaving the two together. Sorry. I heard a bunch of questions in there. Here's what I think you're asking me. Are those the different pieces you're asking me? And so you're now taking back control of the questions. But if the anxiety is feeling quite overwhelming in that moment, it also allows you to slow down the interview enough that as you're reformulating the question, it allows that anxiety brain to start thinking about what the right answer for this might be. So I think I've answered 2 in 1.
Yes. And if I could also add to that one as well. I definitely get anxious, before client meetings or when I know that it's a bigger group. And so I think the unique thing, right, about video chats or video even interviews or video meetings is that as Tracy mentioned, being prepared, but you could also, right, have your notes on the on another screen or just at the left side of the screen, and you could have those 2 screens open. And I think that if you are having anxiety or having brain fog in the moment, you can always refer back to the key questions that that they're going to ask you, or your key points that you want to get across in a meeting. So that's just like another way that where you can cope with the anxiety that you might be feeling at the moment, and having somewhere to refer back to when you do feel really anxious and forgot what you want to say. Okay, so next question. I think we skipped through the scenario question, and maybe we can address it now. So, if an interviewer does actually rush you a lot, or that they are not, they don't seem very responsive, to what you're saying, how should you respond?
I'm going to go back to my suggestion a minute ago, which was if they're rushing through it and interrupting you constantly, taking a couple of their questions and saying, hey, I heard you ask a lot of questions in there. Is this what you're trying to get from me? Or is there something I'm not answering? Because, and that allows you to kind of get them to slow down, and reframe, because sometimes it means they're busy. Sometimes that's their style and they're not aware of that. But in some cases, you're not answering the question they think they asked. So reframing the question, so thinking about what might be triggering them rushing through it, and then coming up with a way to reframe it, sometimes helps us. So a good example is, I heard a lot of questions in there. They seem kind of similar. Am I not, here's what I think you're asking me. Is that accurate? Buys them enough time, because sometimes you need to reframe it, slow them down enough, and then answer that question. And other times it's because you're not answering what they think they're trying to ask. And so by reframing it, you give a chance to say, no, that's not what I'm trying to ask you. I'm trying to ask you this. And so it could come down to that perspective component. What else do we want to deal with?
We also have a question around, if you have or if people, think that you look usually angry, tired, or stressed, and then, when after they talk to you, they say you're so much nicer. We have a question on what you can do to mitigate those kinds of situations.
I have such a hard time with this one, because the standard answer is smile more, and that doesn't really help. And women hear that a lot, right? And so that one doesn't seem fair, because there are guys that look like that too. And yet it's women that it's okay to comment on. And so some of it is right. Like, they don't say, hey, you look grumpy all the time, to most guys. And there are men who look like that too. So it doesn't help in the moment when people expect women to respond differently than men. However, one of them is around tone of voice. So just making sure that your tone is you and not your face, if that makes sense. So if you think people are reading you that way, think about the tone that you're conveying. And honestly, this is a double standard, and I have a tough time with it, because I also don't want to tell you to smile more, because women are constantly hearing that, and I don't think that's cool. So I struggle with that one, I totally admit. And if other people have another answer for that other than tone of voice, so I would use tone of voice and body language to counteract that, if that's how you think you're coming across. It's the best I can do. Michelle, have you got anything else to add to that one? You don't have to if you don't want to.
This is an interesting one. I feel like I also kind of I feel like I don't smile as much as I should as well. But yeah, I definitely agree. Tone of voice is very important, and the message that you're conveying, right, and how you say it is very important. So I think, yeah, that's definitely something that you should focus on when you do get comments, like that. So next question that we have is, how do you answer, or how do you, if you had to take a medical leave as a gap in your job, how would you sort of answer that question of why you have a gap, and explain to them in a way that that is appropriate in an interview setting?
Okay, I think we can do that one. And then there's also, what if you left a company because you had to prioritize your mental health? So I'll try and answer these ones as best as I can. And honestly, it's none of their business, is my first response, right? Like, you have a gap. My hope is that as we move out of the pandemic life, because so many people are going to have gaps that were totally beyond their control, that question's going to come a lot less. So I'm hoping that as we move into that question's going to get asked less. But the honest truth is, you don't have to share anything you don't want to share. They don't need to know that. So and I think that's the important thing that you need to remember. And so if you had to take a medical leave, you had to deal with a family matter. There's things happening in my personal life that just required more of my attention. Are totally okay answers, and they don't need to know that at this stage unless you're comfortable telling them. Now, I also have some friends, one woman, for instance, who was a breast cancer survivor, and she did take time off work to go and do that. And she used that story because she was comfortable using that story. Not everybody is, as a story around resilience and perseverance and what she learned about what was important to her. And she also used it as a chance to pivot her career. So you have choice about how you do that. It's absolutely up to you what you want to do with your personal story. So if there's a story you're comfortable telling around whatever reason it was, then you can weave that in. If you're not, it's really none of their business. You got anything to add to that one, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, I think that, for me as well, during the last couple of years, I've had a lot of kind of family related situations that came up. And I think most people, right, are respectful, right, of, if you tell them it's a family emergency or a medical emergency, they usually don't ask for the details, right? And also it's totally in your right to not have to go into the details. So I think it's definitely, you have to feel comfortable sharing that, and you shouldn't feel, forced to share something, and just make it known that, this is personal. And I think most interviewers or even colleagues, right, are especially in this context, are understanding of that and respectful of that.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. So are we talking about the how not to feel defeated one? Is that what the next one on the list?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So a couple things around that one. When I read that question, I thought, well, you may feel defeated, and your emotion is a data point in there. And you need to acknowledge what you're feeling and why and what's triggering it. And then we can't stop you from feeling defeated. What we can do is give you tips for how to move beyond that. And I go back to some of the dysfunctional team comments that I had earlier. So if someone is overpowering the conversation, you have choices. You can look for someone who feels something similar, and you can usually tell by body language. You can talk to the team lead. You can talk to a mentor about, here's the setting specifically, and here's what I want to do about it. And ask for help around, sometimes you find out this person's always like that. Okay, but that doesn't make it okay. I've heard that before. This person's always like that. That's great. I also know from personal experience that sometimes bad behavior is acceptable in some organizations from some people if they're seen as being a high performer. I used to do a lot of work in the automotive industry, and I go in and I'd be working with sales managers. And there were sales managers who were incredibly rude and abrupt and didn't do their jobs very well. But the one thing they could do is sell cars. So they let them stay on for a really long time, despite the fact of what it was, the impact it was having on the rest of the sales team. But lo and behold, we could do some coaching with them, and they'd move along, and the whole team performance started to pick up if we moderated their behavior. But sometimes I do know that organizations will accept poor behavior in people because they're seen as being really good at their job. That does not mean they're allowed to treat others badly. And so asking for help from others in the organization is needed, because otherwise it just becomes toxic. We're running out of time. The comment about women losing their jobs if they lose access to healthcare, that came out of a poll in the US, where in the US, paid healthcare is very different than it is in Canada. So if you lose your job in Canada, you still have access to healthcare. If you lose your job in the US, you frequently don't have access to very good healthcare. So that's where that was from that survey question up front, where it said percentage of women, people who lost their easy access to healthcare during COVID. That stat is relevant more to the US than to Canada, because in Canada, our healthcare system is set up very differently. So I think we've got time for one more if I'm quick. Which one do you want to do?
I think there's a question around burnout and the issue of burnout and being really focused with work, but then not taking enough breaks or working long hours.
Okay, nope, that's a good one. And I think I'm guilty of that one. I don't know about you. So this comes back down to self-awareness for me, and learning when I get that way and setting myself some ground rules. So especially when COVID hit and all of a sudden my commute went from flying from Toronto to Ottawa on a regular basis. And then once I was in Ottawa, walking to the office or driving to the office. So my commutes were significant. And then my commute cut down to 1.5 minutes. Right? So climbing out of bed, bathroom, kitchen, back, and now I'm working. Hey, wow. And so learning to set those boundaries. And so what I did to help myself unplug a little bit was I actually set up a time with a colleague that I know has a similar problem. And we went for a walk every afternoon at the same time. It was the end of the day. And we plugged in our headsets and went for a remote walk. Now what I'm doing to try and help myself unplug and not work ridiculous hours is I meet one daughter and the dog and I go for a walk up the river. But that's my way of ensuring that my hours are realistic. And I make sure that time reflects whatever time zones I'm working in. Because I realized that when I took on this current client, we're running out of time, that I was working UK hours and Vancouver hours. So shrink your days and get some cues to help you. And I think we're at the top of the hour, are we not?
Yep, we are.
Okay. Casey, where do we go from here? I can keep answering questions for a while. Okay, well, they figure it out. I'm going to attempt to address tone. That one's called practice. So if your tone gets short and emotionless when I'm stressed and it comes across like you're mad, practice. And practice with your children. They're really brutally honest. And also get them to tell you when you sound mad, even if you're not. Because that'll help as well. Everybody's been great. They've asked awesome questions. Thank you, everybody. I think we're going to have one more slide at the end where I think we've provided you with a sample of tools that you can use to help ground yourself in the moment, just be more aware of what you're doing, nutrition and all that kind of stuff. And then if you're really interested in this work around emotional intelligence, I encourage you to pick up anything by Daniel Goleman. Really, really good read and absolutely worth its time, especially if you're looking for this. So thank you, everybody, for attending. This has been fun. And good luck in your job searches. Over to you, Casey.
Thank you, Tracy, for delivering that wonderful and interactive session. Emotional intelligence is so important, especially during these difficult times. So thank you, Tracy and Michelle. We also want to thank our sponsors again, the Dress for Success team, and last but definitely not least, thank you, our participants. We're so happy to be able to provide this workshop for another year, even though, as I've been saying all week, it looks a little different this year, but we can't believe that the week is almost over.